everyone.
Good morning.
As you're probably aware, this is the Noach Torah portion. Quite fitting, as Jeff said, as it's raining today. Seems like I think it was raining last year too. Last year I was able to teach a little bit on this portion, and I focused more on the Tower of Babel, and that was fun. I really enjoyed that part of the story. But this year I thought I'd just go through highlight some points about Noah and the ark and the flood, just some different things, and whet the appetite a little bit. Hopefully you guys can come out to the 1 o'clock study and we can go in more depth. So in chapter 6, it starts off kind of talking about how the earth was corrupt and filled with violence. And then he was going to destroy all flesh and the earth. So it's like kind of reversing the creation that he did in the first portion. And then he tells Noah to build an ark, and then he gives these dimensions. So he foretells him, I'm going to decreate, I'm going to destroy things, but before I do that, I want you to build. So he's telling Noah that you need to do some creation here. And he gives him these dimensions, and the dimensions are at the same ratio that the eventual Ark of the Covenant is going to be. Now the Ark of the Covenant and this Ark are two different Hebrew words, but the author definitely wants us to think about these two things in thematic connection. And then also in this ark, this boat, is going to have 3 tiers. It's going to have a lower level, a middle, and an upper. And this is to take us back to creation a little bit. We have the waters below, the land, and the skies. This is a 3-tiered system in creation, and then we have a 3-tiered system here with this ark. And this is to remind us of the cosmos. So we have like this little preservation of creation in a way. And then God tells Noah to put his family in it. And he says, and the animals. And then in verse 21 he says, take all the food from men and beast. So now we have this little sacred space that he has built, and he's going to have people, animals, and all the food they'll ever need. If that sounds familiar, that's because it's the Garden of Eden all over again. This is a revival of the Garden of Eden. Yet somewhat paradoxically, if that's even a word, the ark in Hebrew is called tebah. And its original meaning, it's actually a loan word from the Egyptian, but its original meaning is coffin, or perhaps an idol shrine box. But this coffin is very much associated with death usually, or this tebah is usually associated with death. But in this instance, it's going to be a vehicle for life. And this is a very common motif in the text. You're going to run into this throughout. I mean, this is one of the most famous narrative stories throughout. Another example would be like Jonah. Jonah is tossed into the chaotic waters, and then the sea monster that we call a fish, because he's technically a fish, but the author wants you to think it's kind of sea monster. The fish swallows Jonah, and this is very much a death-like situation, yet in the belly of this fish, it actually brings forth, he births him out onto the land, and he survives, and this is a vehicle for life. This thing that's like death actually brings forth life. Another example is the children of Israel. They come up to this reed sea, and they're facing it, and they're like, wow, that looks like death. Like, I think I'd rather be enslaved. I'd rather live this normal life enslaved. I'd rather be back with Egypt. But then God provides a way, and what looks like death is actually the vehicle for life. And they pass through, and they're birthed out this birthing canal to where they're alive, and they're saved. This is like the first salvation story in a way. It's Exodus 14. Probably the most famous thing that very much looks like death and very much associated with death is the cross. One of the most torturous, shameful, famous things that you wanted to avoid so badly was getting yourself up on that cross. But then Messiah makes that symbol of death. It literally did kill him, but it then bore fruit. It became a tree of life. So the vehicle of death becomes the vehicle for life. And I think that is an important motif, because every one of us as believers, we come to this place in our life where we're facing death, and man, it looks scary. We're like, that's death. I want to go this way. But actually death is behind us and life is before us. We come to this place, each of us, at least once in our life, I believe, is going to come to this place, and we have to trust God and bear through and push through. Because what looks like death actually brings forth salvation in life. And then in chapter 7, it tells us that Noah is 600 years old when the flood comes. And then it kind of gives this description of decreation. So the waters kind of above begin to break down and rain, and then there's kind of this description of water coming out of the earth. So it's like coming at them from both angles. And then in verse 16, it says that Yahweh shuts him in. So they go in and the door's shut. And this is when Messiah after he was resurrected, he walks on the road to Emmaus. He tells these two guys he's with, and that the whole Tanakh has got all these stories about the Messiah and how he had to go through these things. And so when we read the text, whenever we're reading the Tanakh and the Torah, one of the proper perspectives is to draw out where's the Messiah in this, and what can we learn about the Messiah. And Yeshua tells us in John 10 that he is the door. And he's specifically in that sense, he's talking about this door for the sheep to come in and out of. But this principle is still the same. Like he's this gateway from the outside world of chaos into life. And I think it's very much the same with this door here at this ark, because for Noah, this is very much a door to life. This is very much like he's seeing the rain come, and he's like, well, I know it's going to get crazy out here. I'm going in there now. So it is very much life for him. But for Yeshua, in this spiritual sense, it is very much life for us as well to enter into faith and trust in him as he's going to be that vehicle of life. And then similarly, Noah's now in this ark, he becomes kind of like a new Adam. He's this new creation. He's got 3 sons. He's got all the animals. He's got all the food. He's like this Garden of Eden narrative all over again. And in 2 Corinthians 5:17, it says, those in Messiah are a new creation. So in this kind of spiritual sense, as we enter into the trust of him and we're in this metaphorical ark, we are new created, we are born again, and our life is preserved. Yeshua and Peter both tell us that the end is going to be somewhat like these days of Noah. Peter tells us that it's a lot like the flood, except it's going to be with fire this time. So a little different, but all wise the same. So kind of the way that I theorize maybe some of the stuff playing out in the future, I asked 2 questions myself. When could that be, and what could that even look like? And potentially what that might look like is that there's a time when Messiah comes and we are lifted up with him as an ark is lifted up, and we're safe with him as there's fire below us. It's kind of the way that I envision it. I could be wrong. But then when could this be? I think Noah being 600 years old is a hint towards it. I have a mindset of looking at numbers and thinking through the different parallels, and I kind of think of it as that this is at the conclusion of the 6th century of his life. And I think perhaps at the end of the 6th millennium of the humanity's lifespan that this might take place. That's just a theory, but it's kind of thematically consistent, I think. Soon after this, we get similar theme of decreation, and the whole world is covered with water, just as it was in Genesis 1:2. And then the boat lands on on a mountaintop, and the water recedes. And you have proof of trees with the olive leaf, and then they end up coming out, and you have new animals, and you've got growth, and you've got people on the land. Then he grows a vineyard, which is very much like a garden. And then he has this incident with the fruit of the vine, kind of like a fruit of a tree, that leads to negative consequences. And then that negative consequence of his drunkenness leads to some nakedness, some shame, and eventually the cursing of his grandson. So the first time God cursed the land and the serpent, this time Noah curses his grandson. And so the same pitfalls kind of come into place negatively, but this creation narrative has just flowed twice through the first portion, now through this second portion, and eventually it's going to lead to this Tower of Babel. But I think it's really trying to point towards Abraham. At the very end of this Torah portion, we get introduced to Abraham, and things go much better for the most part with Abraham. So that's all I'll do today, but we'll talk a lot more about it as we get into the 1 o'clock study. So hopefully you guys can join us for that.